Hey everyone, this is Tony here. This is the second video of our distance learning. Quick reminder to check in on my teacher site. If you haven't been already, I'll include the link at the bottom. It's just got updates and general information that'll help you out. Each of the classes are listed here. So let's begin. So I know a lot of you have been missing it, but I figured I'd start off with something that we're all a fan of: vocabulary. I know you all love it. So we're going to be using vocab lists again. However, this time they're going to be a little bit different. We will have quizzes online for them. That'll be pretty straightforward, but I figured I'd introduce you to the first two words if you want to have that daily routine. Mawkish and contrived mawkish, which is childishly emotional. Not that any of you have ever felt this recently. Or contrived, which is deliberately created instead of arising naturally or spontaneously. I'll include the link to this vocab list so that way you can see all 10 words, but I figured we'd get back into at least this part of our routine. So, transitioning into our first unit, I always like to do this the fourth 9 weeks. We are going to be talking about resume writing. Some of you have job experience already and have resumes already written. Some of you do not, and that's okay. My goal with this is to get all of you to a point where you can have a solid resume you can take to an employer and turn it in at the end of this unit. I've had success with a lot of former seniors telling me that they've done that very same thing. So if you put in a little bit of work, you'll be able to leave with something that'll help you out. So let's hop into it. With resume writing, why is it important? Some of it seems a little bit, self-evident, but let's take a look. So it's important because in many cases, it's the first impression that an employer will have of you. It's the culmination of your applicable skills and experiences placed onto 1 to 2 pages. The employer will learn almost everything they need to know about you by reading your resume. And the really shocking part of it is that the average employer spends 30 seconds looking at your resume. That doesn't seem like a lot of time, does it? But that's the truth. They have to sift through dozens, maybe hundreds of them, and they're going to quickly glance to see what stands out. So you want to make sure that yours does. First thing you want to think about, what to include on your resume. There's some things that are pretty straightforward and understandable. There's some things that might not have been as readily apparent, but we're going to talk about those. So the first thing is, of course, your name and contact information. Simple, but it should sit front and center on your resume. Along with your name, you need to include contact information. If they don't know who you are or how to reach you, then they probably don't want to hire you. Just like any of your assignments, put your name on it, an email, a cell phone number. That's all very important so they can reach you. Next thing, of course, is employment history, if you have some. Which is important because they want to know where you've worked and what type of duties you have performed at those jobs. It's a chance to not only provide your previous experience, but also a chance to talk yourself up and emphasize the skills needed to excel in your previous positions. The longer you work, they're going to want to know that also so they can look for any gaps in your employment history. It's okay if you have a week here and a week there between jobs, but if you have 2 to 3 months in between jobs, it's going to raise some red flags on their end, and they might want to question why you have these gaps. But right now, you're young. They'll understand that if you have gaps between your jobs, it's probably because you were being a student. Another thing you want to emphasize is your education history. They want to know what you've accomplished academically. Much like your employment history, your education history can provide an opportunity to list your achievements, accomplishments, and skills that make you a desirable employee for that company. For you seniors, your only academic history that you need to list is that you are graduating from Sale High School. You don't need to include middle school or elementary school. Those are irrelevant. It's just good to indicate the date that you got your diploma. And if you have been a member of any clubs, have had any academic achievements or accomplishments, this is a great place to emphasize those things, especially if they speak to your leadership and abilities. You definitely want to make sure that you list those things so that they have that positive image of you and your time as a senior in high school. The older you get and the more education you get, it's important to list those things too because it'll show the different degrees that you've earned along the way. Next thing you want to include are employable skills. So what this means. So you want to emphasize your worth as a potential employee and list your skills, but you don't want to list every skill you have because not all of them are essential or relevant to the position for which you are applying. You should focus on tasks, skills, and duties that have rendered measurable, intangible results. For instance, if you are applying to work at a restaurant, you might want to emphasize your people skills. If you are going to work in an office, you might want to emphasize your organizational skills or your knowledge of certain programs. If you're going to work, as a babysitter, you want to emphasize your responsibility. There are a lot of different ways that you can emphasize your skills, but it's helpful to know what the job you're applying for asks of you so you can tell them that. And as with any section where description is necessary, you should use this section to put yourself on a pedestal. Be complimentary of yourself and confident in what you bring to the company, but don't brag. Don't say you're the best at something. Don't say that you're going to do something better than anybody else will, but be confident in your abilities. Know that you have skills and know that you can be an asset to a company. Next thing, relevant accomplishments and certifications. This one's kind of a catch-all for other things. Outside of past school and employment accomplishments, you might have experience with groups or affiliations that can bolster your resume, such as charity work or volunteering, memberships to organizations, computer skills, and awards earned. As long as the accomplishments are focused on what you can bring to the table as an employee, they should be listed. For some positions, certain certifications may be required or helpful. These can include things such as a CPR certification, a certain class of a driver's license, or non-diploma program certifications. Those need to be listed as those can also help your cause. This is a chance to just emphasize any other non-school related things you're a part of if you are a part of those. Now, a couple of things, what you want to leave off of your resume. It's very important to consider these things. So you might be tempted to include many things on your resume, especially if you don't have a lot of experience and you're trying to fill all this space. However, some things should be left off because they are either unnecessary or could potentially damage your chances of landing a job. We don't want that. These things include your age, and there's that asterisk right there. You don't really need to divulge that unless a job involves being able to do something like at a restaurant, serve alcohol to patrons, but by and large, they don't need to know your age. Not really necessary. Negative descriptors. This kind of goes without saying. Don't say negative things about yourself. Leave a good first impression. You don't want to give any details that are too personal or irrelevant. They do not need to know your marital status, your religion, your hobbies, your birthday, your political affiliations, because those things can either eat up space or they can sometimes kind of drive a wedge between you and the employer. If you have political affiliations that they might not agree with, keep that to yourself. They don't need to know your marital status. All these things are just inconsequential and unnecessary. You do not need a headshot or a photo unless you are working in entertainment and they ask for one. They don't need to know what you look like. You don't usually need a second page unless they ask for a portfolio attached or any other supplemental material. A second page, they're usually only going to want to be able to see if the front side of a resume. Try to fit everything onto that if you can. They don't really need to know your GPA, especially if it's not a great one. You don't really want to go putting out there that you got a 2.1 or something that's average. If you have a 4.5, cool, great. But you don't usually need to put your GPA on there. Obviously, you don't want to lie. Those things will catch up with you, and you don't want to get caught up in a lie. And of course, typos. The last, but certainly not the least important thing to consider. Make sure it's well written. Make sure they can that everything is grammatically correct and written in a very similar style and tone. So other tips that you can consider for your resume. We have things like keeping it short and to the point. You don't have a lot of space if you're fitting it onto one page, so make sure your descriptors are succinct. Keep the language simple. There you go, pretty straightforward. If you use the objective field, which some resumes will have, make sure it's specific and descriptive. You might want to emphasize that you are a by the time you're done with this, a recently graduated high school senior looking to gain valuable work experience. Don't just say, I'm looking for a job. Be specific with what you want to gain with this job. Are you looking for experience in a specific field? Are you looking for just a variety of work experiences to make you a more well-rounded employee? So take advantage of that if you know how to make it work for you. You might want to list social media profiles if applicable. Another golden rule is if something is questionable on your social media, you might want to delete it before you look for jobs, because they will probably find a way to see some of the stuff out there, and you don't want to give them anything that they will incriminate yourself with, or might give them a reason to not want to hire you. So it's a good time to start doing a social media purge. Have references prepared, but don't list them. They will ask for those as the process of hiring you takes shape. They will ask for those later on, so you don't need to attach them. A professional email address, folks. It's as simple as putting your name at gmail.com, your name and your birth year at gmail.com if you have a fairly common name. They don't want to look at your resume and see bongslayer69 at Gmail. Sorry, folks. It's going to leave a bad impression. You don't want to list previous wages or salaries or expected wages or salaries. It's kind of a faux pas to talk about money right out of the gate. It makes you seem like you are one-dimensional as an employee. You'll want to talk about money as the process continues, especially if they are talking about compensation and they bring it up. But you don't want to be the person who just brings it up unprompted, makes it seem like you're just in it for the money. If you are, that's great, but don't let them think that. And 8, avoid cliches and overused terms. Team player, go-getter, hard worker, self-motivated. Those are very standard cliches in the resume world. This is where you can be descriptive. You want them to know you're hardworking. You want them to know that you're a team player, but you can find more dynamic ways of saying that. So following all this up, we have our first assignment. We're not going to be writing a resume just yet. We're going to work our way to that. So the first thing we're going to do, I have 2 resume examples attached on this presentation. So the next 2 slides will show you an example of a bad resume and an example of a good resume. Based on the information you have just learned about resumes, you will need to do the following. So for the bad one, identify and describe no less than 5 things wrong with the bad resume. So don't just say what the issue is, like she included a photo. Explain why it's an issue that should be avoided, like she included a photo which is unnecessary for applying for this job. And the second resume, identify and describe no less than 3 things that are correct or beneficial about the good resume, explaining why their formatting, language, and descriptors are professional. So you need to be able to identify the language they use to describe their past experiences, the chronological order in which they put their experience. I'll quickly show you them so that way you have an understanding. So first bad resume, and I promise this is an actual real resume somebody has made. So obviously there's a lot of things that jump off the page. You've got multiple colors, multiple fonts, just a ton of stuff. And I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty with you because I want you to be able to find that yourself. But I think it's pretty straightforward that this is going to be an easy one to pick at least 5 things from. So, pick 5, make sure you explain them thoroughly. I think this one should be pretty straightforward. And then you have a good resume, which is kind of dull looking, but that's okay. You don't need something flashy. This is not a real one, but it's kind of formatted to show you, because I don't think anybody's name is Joan E. Jobseeker, but this is formatted to look like a pretty standard professional resume. So go ahead and take your time looking through that. I'll attach the link to this presentation so that way you can look at them at your own discretion and on your own timeline. So that about wraps it up for this first presentation. Please send me a message on Remind, on Teams, through an email, some way, if you have questions or concerns. I've enjoyed reading about what you all have been up to. So let's keep this going. It's good to get in the habit of staying on top of the stuff, developing your routine, so that way you kind of feel like you're back on a proper schedule as best as you can. All right, with that, take care. I'll talk to you guys soon, and good luck with the assignment.